Crescendo. First time I met Adrian Christakos. He was conducting a 100-piece orchestra, like he was trying to pull the music directly from God's hands. I was sitting in the back of the Schermerhorn Symphony Center, supposed to be scouting composition techniques for my album. Instead, just watching this man in a black tuxedo with silver-streaked dark hair dictate the entire emotional trajectory of Mahler's Fifth with nothing but his hands. He was 27, composed of pure intensity, and when he brought the orchestra down to a single violin note, so quiet the audience stopped breathing, I understood something about myself that I'd been avoiding for 3 years. I was in love with classical music in a way that country songwriting had never quite filled. My name is Marcus Delgado. I'm 25, Salvadoran American, born in Nashville to a family of musicians who'd escaped San Salvador in 1989 with nothing but instruments and determination. My father plays guitar. My mother plays piano. I write country songs that chart in the top 40 and play sold-out shows at the Ryman Auditorium. And somehow, it still feels like I'm playing small. When the orchestra finished and Adrian took his bow, that controlled, elegant movement that acknowledged the audience without surrendering his power, realized I needed to talk to him. Not professionally. Not because of the music, though that was true. Because something in me had recognized something in him, and I had to know if he felt it too. I didn't plan to show up at the Schermerhorn the next day. I just ended up there, standing outside the rehearsal studios at p.m., holding coffee I'd brought as an excuse, completely unprepared for what I'd say. Adrian opened the door to Studio C, still wearing his conductor's blacks, hair slightly damp from rehearsal sweat, and his eyes went wide. "Can I help you?" He had an accent Greek underneath the Nashville grown up. His mother's language, maybe. "I was at your performance last night," I said, and my southern accent suddenly felt like a liability. "Mahler's Fifth. You conducted like you were," stopped, recognizing how stupid this was about to sound. "Like you were pulling music out of thin air." Something shifted in his expression. Not annoyance. Recognition. "Thank you." Most people don't understand conducting. They think it's just waving hands at people who already know what to play. It's not. It's communication. The way you brought the orchestra down to that single violin, you were telling them something. A story. He took the coffee from my hand. "Marcus Delgado, I know your music. My sister listens to your album on repeat. She cried during Borrowed Time." My stomach did something complicated. "Adrian Christakos." "Yes," he smiled, and it transformed his face from stern conductor to something warm. "Come in. We're on a break." The rehearsal studio was mostly empty, just a few orchestra members chatting in the corner, warming up instruments. Adrian led me to the conductor's podium, sat on the edge of the grand piano, and looked at me like he was waiting for something. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Because I needed to know if you felt it too." He took a drink of the coffee. "Felt what?" "That moment when you brought the orchestra down. That moment when the music became something bigger than the notes. Something that made you realize you'd been living small your whole life." I was saying this to a stranger in a rehearsal studio in Nashville, which was possibly the most reckless thing I'd ever done. "I thought maybe you knew what that felt like." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I conduct because music is the only language that doesn't require translation. My parents emigrated from Athens. My father couldn't speak English for 5 years, but he could listen to Mozart and understand everything." He paused. "Your songs do that too. That's why my sister cries. Because you're translating something into country that should require orchestral arrangements to say. And somehow, you're doing it with just guitar and voice." Is that a compliment or a criticism? "It's an observation." He set the coffee down. "Are you asking me to dinner because you respect my conducting? Or because you think you're in love with me?" I laughed. It was absurd. It was also exactly the right question. "Both. Neither. I don't know. I just know couldn't leave Nashville without knowing if you felt something." "I do," Adrian said quietly. "But I'm conducting the Nashville Symphony's premiere season opener in 3 weeks. 20 rehearsals, 16-hour days. No time for," he gestured between us. "This." "Okay," I said. "What about after?" "After," Adrian repeated, like testing the word. After might be possible. It wasn't a great plan. It was barely a plan at all. But 3 weeks of stolen moments between his rehearsals and my studio sessions somehow became the scaffolding of something real. Coffee at p.m., when he finished conducting and I finished layering vocals. Text messages at a.m., just finished the Brahms movement. Thinking of you. Is that unprofessional? Not if you're thinking of me at a.m. too. Meeting at the Parthenon on Mondays when the city was quiet. Walking through Greek revival columns while he told me about his family, and I told him about mine. Parents came from nothing, Adrian said once. Sitting on the steps of the Parthenon, looking up at the replica Athena. They expected me to be a doctor. Instead, I chose music, which they thought was throwing away everything they'd sacrificed for. My father still doesn't really understand why I conduct instead of perform. Do you ever think about performing? Every day. I have the hands for it, piano, violin. But conducting is. He paused, searching. Conducting is translating intention. It's taking what's in your head and making 100 other people feel it exactly the way you do. That's a different kind of performance. Is that why you chose it? No, he said. I chose it because I fell in love with the conductor when I was 22. He showed me that you could be in control of everything, the tempo, the emotion, the narrative, and still let other people shine. I learned his language. Then I learned it wasn't him I loved. It was the language itself. I understood. That's why I write country songs instead of performing classical pieces. Because I can say more in 3 minutes of country than I can in 30 minutes of orchestral composition. The constraint is the freedom. Yeah, Adrian said. And he took my hand. Exactly like that. The premiere season opener was 3 weeks away. Then 2 weeks, then 1. Adrian was pulling 18-hour rehearsal days. I was finishing my album, a project that had dragged on for 8 months. Mostly because I'd been waiting for inspiration that kept showing up as thoughts about a man with silver-streaked hair and Greek-inflected English. Tell me something true. I said to Adrian on night 12 of his premiere prep, in his Germantown apartment. Both of us exhausted beyond sense. He was lying on his couch, head in my lap, eyes closed. Like what? Like why you're letting me stay when you should be sleeping alone, resting your voice for rehearsals you don't even sing in. He smiled without opening his eyes. Because you're the only thing that makes sense right now. Everything else is logistics, tempo, dynamics, section balance. But you just are. You're just real in here, and not trying to be anything except what you are. That's very romantic for a man who looks like he's 3 seconds from passing out. I'm conducting Brahms tomorrow. I can be romantic and exhausted simultaneously. He opened one eye. Are you seeing anyone else? No, are you? I've been waiting for you to ask that since we met at the Schermerhorn. He sat up, pulled me close. I'm very in love with you, Marcus. I want you to know that before the premiere happens and everything gets insane. I kissed him. It was the first time we'd kissed, and it tasted like coffee and exhaustion, and the specific relief of admitting something you've been holding for weeks. His hands came up to my face, gentle but firm, and for a moment, the entire world narrowed down to just us in his apartment, while Nashville carried on outside. I love you too, I said against his mouth. Even though you're about to conduct in front of 3,000 people, and you're going to be brilliant, and I'm going to cry in the audience like your sister cries at my music. You're coming? Of course, I'm coming. I wouldn't miss. His phone alarm went off. He had to be at the Schermerhorn for rehearsal in 45 minutes. Damn it, Adrian said, but he was smiling. Stay, drink my terrible coffee, judge my sheet music organization, use my shower. I'll come back between rehearsals and make you lunch if I have time. You won't have time, then I'll make time. He was already standing, pulling on his conductor's blacks. Because that's what you do for people you love. You make time. The morning of the premiere, I was in my studio with a mixer and a deadline. The album was due to my label in 4 hours, final masters needed, and I had one song that refused to sit right. Borrowed time, the one Adrian's sister cried over, was still missing something. An orchestral layer couldn't quite construct alone. I was so focused on the problem that I almost didn't hear the fire alarm. Then I heard it, not the studio alarm, but sirens outside. The distinctive wail of Nashville Fire Department racing down Music Valley Drive. My studio was in the Pinnacle, a converted historic building that housed 15 independent recording studios. And the smell of smoke was suddenly, unmistakably, real. I called out to the control room. "You smell that?" "Yeah," Tommy, my engineer, shouted back. "That's Jesus. That's not our building. That's the Pinnacle East. The sister building, the Pinnacle East, where Advanced Sound had their studios. Where I knew 3 other artists recorded. Where the smoke smell was getting thicker." I looked at the clock. 1:47 p.m. Adrian's premiere started at p.m. The Schermerhorn was 45 minutes away if traffic was good. He was probably in final rehearsal, phone off, completely unreachable. "We need to clear the building," Tommy said, and he was already moving, backing up drives, grabbing external hard drives. Now, I grabbed my laptop with the final album masters, 4 years of work, all the music that might define the next 2 years of my career. The backing tracks that Adrian had helped me understand how to structure. The song that was still missing its orchestral layer. We got out of the Pinnacle in 7 minutes. By the time we reached the parking lot, I could see smoke coming from the East building, and fire trucks were pulling up, crews deploying, that controlled chaos of emergency response. "Is everything backed up?" I asked Tommy. "Cloud backup, external drives, your laptop." "Yes, we're good." He looked shaken. "My God, if that fire had spread to the West building," but I wasn't thinking about the West building. I was thinking about Adrian at the Schermerhorn, probably texting me right now, wondering why I wasn't responding. I was thinking about the premiere in 6 hours and 13 minutes. I was thinking about how small everything suddenly felt: album releases and chart positions and Grammy nominations compared to the fact that the person I loved was about to go on stage in front of 3,000 people, and I needed to be there to see him do it. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Fire at my studio. We're safe. I'm coming to the premiere. I'll be there." The Schermerhorn at 7:15 p.m. is a cathedral of anticipation. 3,000 people in formal wear, orchestra members warming up on stage, the energy of a premiere hanging in the air like electricity. I found my seat front row center, orchestra level, and watched the stage fill with musicians. Adrian emerged at 7:58, and the audience stood. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, composed and certain, and he scanned the audience once, quickly, before taking his place at the podium, looking for me. When his eyes found my face, something shifted in his expression: relief, confirmation, love. Then the conductor's mask slipped back on, and he raised his baton. The premiere began. I don't have the vocabulary to describe what happened next. I know that Brahms' violin concerto is technically demanding, emotionally devastating, and absolutely requires a conductor who understands that the orchestra isn't playing the music, they're telling a story that the conductor is interpreting in real time. Adrian conducted like he was translating the innermost thoughts of every musician on stage, like he was giving them permission to feel everything, like he was saying, with every gesture, "I understand. I feel this too. Trust me." The lead violinist, concertmaster David Chen, played like he was having a conversation with Adrian, and Adrian responded with minute adjustments, tempo shifts, dynamic changes that seemed to anticipate what the violin wanted to say before it said it. By the second movement, I was crying. By the third, everyone around me was crying. By the final notes, that devastating diminuendo that Adrian had taught the orchestra over 20 rehearsals, the entire concert hall was holding its breath. The final note rang out and faded into silence. Then 3,000 people stood up as one. Adrian took his bow, and his eyes found mine again across the orchestra section. He smiled, not the controlled conductor smile, but the real one, the one that said, "I did it. We did it. I'm so glad you're here." The after party was at a venue in the Gulch, and I found Adrian 40 minutes after the concert ended, still wearing his tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone, hair slightly messed, looking like a man who just conducted the most important night of his life and was still vibrating with adrenaline. "You came," he said, pulling me into a hug that lifted me slightly off the ground. "You came. You were there. I saw you. and I nearly lost my place in the third movement. You didn't lose your place. You were perfect. I was thinking about you the entire time. That's not professional. It was very professional. You just conducted while being in love. That's called being human. I'll back to look at his face. I finished my album. The final masters are done. But there's one song that's missing something, and I think I know what it is. What? An orchestra. Your orchestra. Would you? He kissed me before I could finish. There in the middle of the after party, in front of his musicians and my manager and 100 Nashville industry people. It was a proper kiss, the kind that said, yes, absolutely. I will orchestrate your entire life if you let me. When he pulled back, he was grinning. Yes, obviously yes. We'll arrange it. We'll make it perfect. 3 months later, the album release, Borrowed Time, came out on a Tuesday, with a string arrangement that made people think Adrian Christakos had somehow been inside my head when he was composing. The Greek influence mixed with the country sensibilities, the orchestral arrangement that somehow made the guitar sing louder instead of quieter. The song went to number 3 on the country charts. It stayed there for 8 weeks. In the music video, I'm playing guitar on the Schermerhorn steps, and Adrian's conducting an unseen orchestra while the Nashville skyline glows behind us. The final shot is him lowering his baton and looking at me, and me looking back at him, and the city lights catching in both our eyes, like we just saved something that mattered, because we had. 6 months later, the Propa Sally did it at the Parthenon, where we'd spent so many Monday afternoons talking about music and family and the specific courage it takes to live authentically. I proposed in front of the replica Athena, with a ring that had belonged to Adrian's grandmother, a white gold band with a small but perfect diamond. He said yes so fast, I barely got the question out. The wedding was a blend of everything. We were country musicians and classical orchestras, Salvadoran American and Greek American, Nashville, and the spaces we'd found in between. My father played guitar. His father, who'd finally understood that music was a valid profession, conducted a 20-piece ensemble. We walked down the aisle to a composition Adrian had written specifically for the moment, and when we reached the altar, the entire audience was already crying. CCTV footage. The Schermerhorn Symphony Center. Timestamp 2014. 47. A man in a tuxedo stands at the conductor's podium, baton raised, and an orchestra plays. In the audience, visible in the reflected light, another man watches with tears in his eyes. The orchestra is playing the arrangement, the one Adrian created, the one that made Borrowed Time into a symphony. The conductor's eyes are closed, but his hands are precise, certain, telling a story that only happens when two artists figure out how to speak the same language. Behind them, the Nashville skyline glows through the concert hall windows. Inside, 3,000 people listen to the sound of two men learning to love each other through music.